Now I know what you're thinking if you're familiar with the discourse around this show. Mainly that there's not much more that can be said at this point. But I put it to you, there are some interesting aspects of Star vs. the Forces of Evil that from what I've seen have been largely unexamined. Specifically, the aspects of the show that come out when you analyze the evolution of Star's ideological beliefs over the course of the show, and the beliefs of those she fights against. I was initially pretty skeptical about the show, but after my girlfriend roped me into watching it, I can admit there's way more to it than its first impression. Especially because, to my ear, the intro song is a bit rough. But who knows, maybe the kids like it. Anyway, the show stands out, even in the increasingly crowded field of quality cartoons aimed at a general audience. For those who haven't seen the show and are watching this video anyway, which, no judgment, I am entirely that person all the time on here, let me give you a quick rundown of the premise. So, Star vs. the Forces of Evil, often shortened to Star vs., is a show that follows the eponymous Star, a highly energetic magical princess from another dimension called Mewni. Upon her coming of age and receiving the royal magic wand, her family, not wanting to deal with her chaotic use of it, dump her on Earth, where she becomes an exchange student at a high school in Southern California. She moves in with her host family, the Diazes, and quickly befriends Marco, the son of the family. Marco plays the comedic foil for much of Star's hijinks in the early seasons, which she gets into quite a lot of. But this is merely what the show is in the beginning. If you've heard of the show, you've probably heard about its considerable shifts across its seasons. There's a sizable number of people who I'm confident would have preferred the show kept to its original premise, this reverse isekai if you're some kind of weeb. I wouldn't go so far as to say these people are categorically wrong, but I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be making this video had the show not gone in the direction it did. The show changes setting, tone, and even major themes over the course of its run. A sizable amount of the conflict in the show involves monsters. In the beginning of the show, they are treated as a monolithic evil force that Star fends off with her magic. Pretty much what you'd expect from the genre. But as the show develops, the reality of their existence is revealed. Far from what their pejorative label implies, they are shown to be a largely sympathetic set of people, pushed out of the society led by the Mewmans, the analog for humans living on Mewni. As you may have guessed, it's this aspect of the show that produces the wider topic of this video. For while many are able to see the obvious racism, relatively few seem to have decoded how much further this story goes beyond the standard racial reconciliation plotlines you often see in shows of this kind. I've seen far more discussion of shipping than unpacking this wider allegory.
Hey, there's more to life than shipping!
Don't you dare insult shipping in my presence!
But this isn't terribly surprising. These themes can be invisible without sufficient background. In much the same way, the underlying ideology responsible for most of the conflicts Star finds herself in was invisible to her in the beginning of the show. But I get ahead of myself. The show is good. It's funny, like, extremely funny. There's a lot of quality comedy with superb off-the-wall escalations and excellent comedic timing. But there are also some issues worth quickly pointing out. There's some strange continuity problems and plot beats whose implications may not have been fully considered before committing to pen. Those issues aside, if all that sounds interesting and you're looking for a cartoon to watch with the family, I would strongly recommend it. I'll also say, while I'm not going to spoil literally everything in the show, I will be spoiling quite a few major plot points, as well as the ending of the series itself, so spoiler warning and all that. Alright, enough preamble, let's begin this analysis in earnest. It's not uncommon for main characters in contemporary family cartoons to have arcs. It is, however, rather uncommon for a character's major arc to be an unmistakably ideological one. More often, the arcs are about some other kind of personal growth, be it defeating a rival, overcoming hardships, gaining an understanding of themselves, being a better person in a general sense, and so forth. Star's arc, by contrast, is not one focused on herself as a person, but one about her discovering the true political shape of the world, and the decisions she makes using this information that go against the grain, changing the world for the better. This is not to say she doesn't undergo any other personal growth, as she definitely changes over the course of the show, though I would argue these personality changes are not as much a core driver of the overall plot as her ideological growth is. But let's start at the beginning of the series. Throughout much of Season 1, Star is in what I would describe as a default ideology. A generally unexamined ideology adopted passively from one's parents and circumstances when growing up. I would put it to you that most people go through a significant period of this default ideology. Many never escape it at all. Now, while Star has her differences and disagreements with her parents, particularly her mother, Queen Moon, these quarrels are based around her not wanting to conform to the expectations of her role as a princess, certainly not deeply held political disagreements. Anyway, in this default ideological state, monsters are enemies to be defeated with the use of magic. Even non-hostile monsters are to be treated with scorn and derision.
Split into 2 teams, monsters and humans.
Can I be a human?
You are a monster. That's why you were invited.
The monarchy is legitimate and just.
I was born to lead, literally.
And more broadly, that there are no systemic problems, that the structure of the world is fundamentally just. However, in Mewni Day, near the end of Season 1, the first crack in this ideology begins to show. It forms when Star is exposed to an outside perspective, as they often do in real life. In the episode, Star gets some of the people she's met on Earth to reenact part of Mewni's history. She explains the history of Mewni using what is 100% a visual reference to the Little Golden Books series of kids' books.
But the wicked monsters rose up and attacked the innocent humans to re-steal Mewni for themselves. So the queen used her magic to turn the simple peasants into a fearsome army. And then there was fighting. And the humans won!
Real quick, this explicitly colonial setup reminds me of a different animated show that came out a few years after Star vs., Netflix's Hilda. Hilda engages with the theme of colonization and those pushed out by it a fair bit. Here though, this is merely the preamble to a much larger theme. This is, to put it bluntly, the birth of Mewni's Ethnostate. While I don't think Marco necessarily fully clocks this, he does question the history.
Star, I know the monsters are bad and all, but this seems unfair.
This, in turn, causes Star to begin to scrutinize the story, becoming more visually uncomfortable as she does. This is already pretty great. Finding out the truth of events glossed over by slanted versions of history should make one feel uncomfortable. And having the slanted source in question being a children's book is another excellent layer of realism. Many accounts of historical events given in schools are sanitized or otherwise distorted to a farcical degree. Smiling pilgrims and First Nations people together at Thanksgiving and all. I would reckon seeing through this kind of artifice is a first step in many people's ideological journeys. Near the end of the episode, Star's moral quandary gives her enough pause to not use her magic to blast Buffrog, a monster who tried to steal her wand during the reenacted battle. This is a critical moment, if a subtle one. Perhaps she sees him for the first time as a person. In this moment, Star has moved out of the default ideological state and is now actively questioning her worldview. And to her credit, she is already making different decisions based on this new information. She even puts out an ear of corn for Buffrog at the end of the episode, a small but important step forward. Now I want to highlight something real quick to make sure I don't lose anybody. If you're a certain kind of person, you're probably thinking to yourself, Mewni can't be an ethnostate, there are numerous other kingdoms of non-humans. The show itself calls attention to this seeming contradiction in a later episode in Season 3. Ultimately, the excuses for these carve-outs line up neatly with what the politics of the day requires, to say nothing of Rich Pigeon.
And he's a pigeon! With legs, mother! How is he not a monster?
Well, dear, he's rich.
I'd like to further drill down on the flexibility of the term monster here in relation to Mewmin. The dynamic is a fairly clear analog to the concept of whiteness. Over time, the bounds of this definition have changed to encompass groups that were not originally deemed white. In that same way, these few carve-outs are made Mewmin through similar means. By contrast, the many races that fall under the classification of monster are demonized and pushed out. To butcher an occasionally used quotation about this kind of thing, Mewmins are of the in-group that the law protects but does not bind, in contrast to the monsters who are of the out-group that the law binds but does not protect. And so, as physically diverse as the citizens of Mewni are, it is still, functionally, an ethnostate. It is also interesting how the monsters have seemingly accepted the Mewman framing of their existence. One would think they would have a less pejorative label to call themselves, but I can understand the writers not wanting to overcomplicate the terminology. Still, one does wonder. Anyway, let's return to Star. In the penultimate episode of Season 1, Ludo, the leader of the gang of monsters attempting to steal Star's wand, is deposed by Toffee. Toffee quietly leveraged his considerable management skills in previous episodes to accomplish this. Now Toffee is on a whole different threat level than Ludo, who is played almost entirely as a joke. After taking power, Toffee immediately succeeds in having Marco kidnapped, luring Star to the monster castle. Toffee demands Star's wand in exchange for Marco's life. Star, not having any options remaining, agrees and hands the wand over to Toffee. However, unlike Ludo, who wanted to personally wield the power of the wand, Toffee instructs her to
destroy it.
Yeah, stick the mother of all pins in that one. But in this specific moment, we find out something very important about Toffee. Toffee is ideologically motivated. While we don't find out the full scope of Toffee's plan until much later, his request implies a structural critique of one of the major pillars of Mewni's ethnostate, perhaps the pillar when it comes down to it. One could also say that Toffee is embodying the lesson that the Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's house. Anyway, Toffee instructs Star to use a very special spell to destroy the wand, the Whispering Spell. Note that the fact that Toffee even knows about this spell in the first place hints at a history there, some of which will be explored later in the series. Star casts the spell and immediately runs for cover. The wand begins to go supernova. Toffee is not fazed by this though. For him, everything is proceeding just according to Kaikaku. He seems to know exactly what's coming. And then, boom, the wand explodes. It is not fully destroyed, however. Star is able to recover it, though a sizable chunk of it remains unaccounted for. Later on, Moon describes the state of the wand as cleaved. Again, stick a pin in it. All in all, I'd call the Season 1 finale pretty solid. It lays a lot of the groundwork for things to come later, particularly things that pertain to the subject of this video. On that note, before things get any more complicated, I think now is a good time to start talking about magic. Right up front, I want to draw a distinction between what I'll call capital M magic and lowercase m magic. This isn't merely my conjecture, I would argue the logic of the show sorts it into that structure as well, even though it's never said explicitly. Anyway, lowercase m magic is what I would call the kind of magic Ponyhead uses to fly around and fire off energy blasts. This is in contrast to the much stronger capital M magic, the kind Star uses. Later on in the series, we see pretty much the entire cosmology of this kind of institutional magic, its major players, and its weirdo founder. But for now, let's keep this simple, focusing only on what we are shown in the first season. Of the spells Star uses, a significant amount of them are of the non-combat variety. However, I would argue these non-combat spells are largely incidental. The primary thing her magic is designed for is to fight monsters. This is so core to her role that it's even in the non-diegetic outro song.
I'm blasting monsters and I never break a sweat.
While a lot of what Star does in Season 1 is rebellious, this monster fighting is entirely in line with her expected role as a magical member of the Mewni monarchy. You can see inklings of this in the Mewni Ethnostate story, where magic is used to strengthen the Mewmans in their fight to subjugate the monsters, killing quite a few of them if the moniker Great Monster Massacre is to be believed.
That is my least favorite holiday.
This magic is explicitly shown to be a tool of institutional oppression, and the wand is an intense locus of it. A famous political leader with a terrible haircut once said, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Or wand, in this case.
Here's the plan. We're going in on the count of one.
That is not good plan.
One.
As undeniably hilarious a gag it is for Star to tactical reload her wand, it does underscore its true nature. Her parents, in no uncertain terms, handed her a loaded gun, one which grants her significant power over monsters. Power that she uses aggressively in the Season 1 finale. One could forgive Star for this cop moment, as the monsters in question had until recently been part of the group that kidnapped Marco, but it's still worth pointing out that she does not hesitate, even though these monsters were not in any way threatening her at this moment. It speaks to the way anyone with her power could use her magic, and the nature of the magic itself. Now in Season 2, we don't see any major shifts in Star's worldview. However, there are a few moments that likely push her in the right direction. Most of Season 2's plot-heavy episodes serve to set up characters and institutions, rather than tell a focused season-long story. That's not to say that they're not worth watching, of course, there's still a great deal of quality comedic moments, but it's still something of a slow burn. Notably, Season 2 introduces Mina.
Now let's start by rounding up the rest of these folks and pushing them off this here ledge.
Again, put a pin in that one. In her introduction, Mina isn't quite what she winds up as later on in the series. More of a whacked-out authoritarian here than an explicit ethno-nationalist. Though both those traits very often come as a package deal, so it's not exactly a stretch. Moreover, she didn't really have the opportunity to display anti-monster bigotry on Earth, for obvious reasons. Also, wow, is it hard not to hear Princess Carolyn sometimes when Mina is speaking. As for Star, after working with Buff Frog in the Season 1 finale, she deepens her friendship with him when she babysits his tadpoles. She doesn't even bat an eye at his request, even ending the episode with,
I like that guy.
a nice moment. However, despite this personal connection to Buff Frog, later on in the season, she attacks a group of non-hostile monsters just sort of hanging around, out in Ludo's former underground lair. Despite her having another cop moment, they patiently explain to her that they're not looking for a fight. She seems genuinely perplexed by this. Some of the monsters are even pretty stoked to meet her.
Yeah, you do things your own way, like us.
Please, shoot us with a spell. Rip some awesome holes in our jeans, something.
There is something a little perverse about monsters wanting to be magically blasted for clout, but it does again speak to the larger dynamic of how monsters are uniquely the target of magic. At any rate, being exposed to these monsters likely was another stepping stone for Star to push her worldview further. On the note of magic, the wand, which was severely damaged in the finale of the previous season, now misfires a significant amount of the time. This seems largely to correlate with Star's emotional state as she tries to use it. Not anything that hasn't been done before in other shows of this nature, but it is an interesting way to add an emotional layer to fights. It also significantly depowered Star, leading to this moment.
This is the worst wand fight I've ever seen.
Needless to say, Ludo is very much back on his bullshit, having finally caught the car he's been chasing. Kind of. A shard of Star's wand broke off in the explosion ending Season 1, which Ludo fashioned into a wand of his own, powered largely by his impotent rage. In Season 2, there's also a greater emphasis placed on Star's family spellbook and the teacher contained within, Glossaric. He pushes Star to become proficient in magic throughout much of Season 2. He also teaches her to start doing magic without a wand. Through Glossaric, we are also introduced to the Magical High Commission. Despite their seeming wider mandate to oversee all magic in the universe, they appear to be primarily concerned with capital M magic. You'll note they are only introduced when there begin to be problems with said institutional magic. And of this magic, they are focused on its political implications and preserving it as a core pillar of the monarchy's power. The Magical High Commission are shown from the very beginning to answer directly to Queen Moon. Of those on the Magical High Commission, it's worth mentioning Romulus specifically. For while Star has her cop moments, This dude is a straight-up cop. His entire thing is freezing people based on his gut feelings. I probably don't need to spell it out that his practice is a very direct allegory for the carceral state. I'm sure even the most ideologically checked out adult viewers clocked that one. Star's initial reaction to him was entirely the correct one.
Why did you cause the fritz? No.
It's definitely a deliberate choice that both his look and methods are far more monstrous than any of those coded as monsters on Mewni. Approaching the end of Season 2, I'll note there may be something of a setup for Moon. As Moon rides away from Ludo's family dwelling, one of Ludo's brothers, Dennis, implores Moon to help Ludo, which to her credit, she tries. Regrettably though, unknown to Moon, Ludo is possessed by Toffee at this point, and it does not end well for her. Now, while this act goes largely uncommented on by the show directly, I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination to think that this might further sour Moon's opinion on monsters. Can't say anything conclusive here, but it is an interesting data point to, say it with me now, stick a pin in for later. Of course, Moon's incapacitation does not last. She is saved by Lekmet, the real GOAT Special Edition, as he sacrifices himself to try to save everyone. Pity we never saw more of him, beyond him attempting to rein in Romulus. Perhaps he was a moderating force on the Magical High Commission. Anyway, after the Avengers-style fight against Toffee-possessed Ludo, Moon returns to Earth to fetch Star. Star is heartbroken about leaving Earth, but understands the need for it when Moon mentions Toffee's involvement. Much to both Star and Marco's dismay, she leaves Earth. This sets up the first part of Season 3, also known as the Battle for Mewni. So the Battle for Mewni is the first 7 episodes of Season 3. A lot happens in these episodes, to put it lightly. In terms of Star's ideological development, the Battle for Mewni also marks a pretty important turning point for her relationship with Moon. Star, very much put out with Moon's plan of hiding in the sanctuary until the situation improves, puts her on blast.
You lied to me.
Star, what are you doing?
What else have you lied about, Mom?
Moon then tells Star her history with Toffee, setting up the second episode in the set. Moon's episode is a brilliant bit of backstory for numerous characters, most notably Moon herself. Toffee killed Moon's mother, Comet, when Moon was about Star's age, making her the new queen. Moon had to grow up fast, real fast with the political situation she was thrust into. During treaty negotiations with the then existing monster government, one of their generals went rogue and began threatening the kingdom. This general was Toffee.
You're the one they call the lizard.
Yes, but you may call me Toffee.
Toffee? How is that any better?
It's worth wondering about the nature of this potential treaty between humans and monsters. We never find out its exact details, but we can be pretty sure that the terms of the treaty are set entirely by the humans, having institutional magic on their side and all. Perhaps it would have imposed an unjust peace, and in the grand scheme of things, Toffee might not have been wrong to resist it. This is just spitballing, admittedly, but it wouldn't be without precedent in history. Whatever the original intention of the treaty was, after blowing Toffee's finger off with a spell learned from Eclipisie, the crystallized former queen, Moon declares her intentions for monster kind.
I will hunt down the remains of the monster army and scatter them without country or leadership. Now, are there any questions?
Which, let's be entirely clear on what this means. This is consigning the entire monster population to have no recognized political representation, removing what few rights they may have previously had to self-determination. Now, this might not literally violate the Geneva Convention, but it does seem to conflict with the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or monster rights in this case. If any of those things existed on Mewni, anyway.
War criminal! War criminal!
Popping back to the present, Moon and Star's rest in the sanctuary is interrupted by essentially an oil spill of tainted magic. The corruption of magic seen in the previous season is reaching its apex. They are both forced to flee and seek help from Star's friend, Buffrog. Moon is immediately aghast.
We cannot stay with him. He's a monster!
Mom, get with the times. Not all monsters are bad.
Now this answer by Star reveals how far she's come ideologically, yet also how far she has to go. Buried in the line, "not all monsters are bad," is the unstated corollary that most monsters are, in fact, bad. This also reveals Star's perspective to currently be focused on individuals, rather than a more systemic critique. Even still, the fact that Star is confident enough in her values to confront Moon here demonstrates how she is emerging from Moon's ideological shadow, even feeling strongly enough to apologize for her parent, something I'm sure a lot of people have regrettably had experience with.
I'm sorry. My mom's got monster issues.
Yes, I'm getting certain vibe from her.
Also in this episode, Moon and Buffrog play a monster board game about preventing humans from eating babies. They argue over who the real baby eaters are, revealing that the stories in all likelihood were apocryphal at best, and nobody has seen the behavior firsthand. This does really speak to how these dangerous cultural memes can quickly depart from anything resembling reality. During this argument, they begin discussing their children, which causes Buffrog to blow Star's cover as she tries to sneak out to take on Toffee herself. Definitely one of the best expressions in the show right here. But let's fast forward to the final confrontation. It's revealed that Toffee has been corrupting the magic himself.
Oh!
After he was sent into some kind of magic pocket dimension when the wand exploded at the end of Season 1, Star follows Toffee to this place by exploding Ludo's wand hand thing. Here we see Toffee at his most powerful, effectively undoing a foundational force in both the political and physical universe. Through possessing Ludo, he makes a deal to get his finger back, which enables him to reintegrate himself and leave the dimension of magic. Moon returns the finger to him with the aim of getting Star back, yet she does not reappear. It's hard to say whether Toffee doesn't have the ability to return her, or just doesn't want to, but whatever the case, he merely walks away. Meanwhile, Star, still in the pocket dimension, looks desperately for a single spark to try to use to rid magic of Toffee's corruption. She dives deep into the muck trying to get at a distant spark, and winds up kind of dying? She runs into her old mentor, Glossaric, who is also kind of dead at this point. As to what happens next, I won't mince words. Even given the already problematic nature of magic and how it is used, the scene where Star revives it, in the most Star way possible, is nothing short of incredible.
Star, what are you doing?
I'm getting us out of here.
Star, no! It's boiling!
Dip.
In a single sequence, Star revives magic, ascends to her butterfly form, learns Hyper Beam, and obliterates Toffee, though Ludo steals the kill. It's understandable that Star would do this, as Toffee has repeatedly threatened the people she loves. I will say it's also up for debate how in control of herself she is when she does this. And that's the end of Toffee. It is somewhat regrettable that we never find out what exactly he would have done in a post-magic world, had he fully achieved his plan. He had no interest in finishing off Moon, though perhaps he only wanted her to suffer more from the expected loss of Star. While he did slay Star's grandmother, that was an understandable element of his fight for monster liberation. We are never shown him being a tyrant, more of a manipulative dick, if anything.
I thought you might, you fat bag of garbage.
Whether his intentions are building a new country for monsters, or rounding up an army to eliminate all of them humans, is an open question. However, keeping it ambiguous was probably for the best. Had they painted him any more sympathetically, it would have turned this moment of Star's victory over a specific monster who threatened her family and friends into Star violently suppressing a well-deserved monster revolution with the magic of the state, which she is personally responsible for reviving. Which, let me be clear, this moment can still absolutely be read as both of those things, but keeping it ambiguous as is prevents it from being a straight tragedy in light of later events. Again, pin in it. In truth, I don't think Toffee was anywhere near as wasted as some seem to believe he was, though being such a quality villain, it's very hard not to want more. Speaking of villains, it's funny that Star disposes of Ludo in much the same way she did at the end of Season 1, though critically on Ludo's request this time. Ludo says it's for him to work on himself. That's quite a choice for self-discovery. She sends him hurtling through a star fissure. Maybe he expects to wind up on Mist Island or something. The battle for Mewni also ends with the hook for the future parts of Season 3, the return of Queen Eclipisie. After the battle for Mewni, Star officially enters the lib phase of her ideological development. While that might sound like an insult, I actually mean it in an endearing way here. After all, it would be pretty rich of anyone on what little there is of the actual American left to chide somebody for going through a lib phase. Especially Star, in light of where she ultimately ends up. That said, it's still an absolutely adorable level of naivete.
Yes! Do presses, do presses. Stop following the old ways. We need to be the change we want to see. That's why I'm hoping you'll sign this super awesome petition of friendship between monsters and humans.
To her credit, she does a variety of meaningful things over the course of Season 3 to advance her new cause of uniting humans and monsters. For example, the Unity Party she throws. However, this party is ruined by Mina, and to a lesser extent, Eclipse's daughter, Meteora. Here we see Mina's ethno-nationalism in full force as she comes very close to executing Meteora for the crime of being a mixed-race heir to the throne. Fortunately, she is prevented from doing this, but the party is still ruined, much to Star's despair.
This is all my fault. I really thought I could just change everything overnight. Ugh.
At the end of the night, she pulls rank to prevent the monsters she invited from being unjustly detained.
Let him go!
Yes, Your Highness.
I am so sorry this happened to you guys.
It's okay, Star. Trust me, this happens to us all the time.
One of Star's most interesting head-on encounters with the Ethnostate this season is when she meets with the royal monster expert. First, it's extremely telling that Moon says the definition of who is and is not a monster is out of her hands, under the purview of this expert.
Enough! Look, I don't make the rules. The royal monster expert does.
Moon may just mean this as a dodge to escape accountability for the harm Star is describing, but more troublingly, she may legitimately believe in the quote-unquote scientific justification for the definition implied by the existence of this expert. That justification being straight-up Enlightenment-era scientific racism. I half expected Dr. Goodwell here to pull out a pair of skull calipers. It's also worth pointing out the purple gem in her hat is not dissimilar from the one in Glossoric's head, perhaps symbolically linking her to the political system he created. While I'm sure many people immediately saw that she was a problem, I would imagine most wrote her off as a harmless kook, if anything. But I would argue this is actually one of the most subtly powerful critiques in the entire show. The ridiculous race science of the Enlightenment era may be in the dustbin of history, but the attitudes behind it are alive and well. Especially this form of condescending fetishization of other cultures.
Here, I thought we should live separately, but really, humans should live like monsters! Ha ha! Play in the mud, act like idiots. Oh, I'm a monster. I'm a monster.
Dr. Goodwell here may low-key be one of the worst individuals in the entire series, even before she attempted to reenact the first GLA mission from Command & Conquer Generals. Again, to Star's credit, she takes the material step of appointing Buffrog to the monster expert post, hoping that he can make a difference. Unfortunately, later in the season, we see that this did not work out. Buffrog and the rest of the monsters decide to leave Mewni. This may seem like it comes from nowhere, but you have to put it in the context of the historical struggle of the monsters. You'll recall that Moon, presumably unlike at least a few of the rulers before her, took away the rights of monsters to organize into any kind of polity or coherent faction. In that context, with things moving backwards in the past few decades, it makes sense that the monsters would see the writing on the wall and leave, especially in light of the near destruction of their village. Despite everything Star has done, things are still intolerably bad for them, as we've seen throughout the series. Needless to say, Star is heartbroken at all this.
Sorry, Star. You tried, but it not work. This not a problem you can solve.
One of the biggest oofs in the series right there. Even still, despite this, she only deepens her commitment to her principles. Also of note in Season 3, we are shown another perspective of the source of institutional magic, a shiny place that rejuvenates Moon and Star, yet also drains them of their intelligence in mere moments. On a thematic level, perhaps this brain drain can be read as power destroying people's minds, particularly the closer you are to it. But I may be reading too much into it. Of course, the standout new character of Season 3 is Queen Eclipisie, now freed from her whack-ass crystal prison after Toffee's demise, her deal with Moon now complete. However, this newfound freedom would have been exceptionally short-lived if not for Star, as Moon immediately orders the Magical High Commission to re-imprison her.
I gave my orders to the Magic High Commission, and they're on their way to her cell as we speak. She's to be recrystallized immediately.
We'll see about that.
Star goes to bat for Eclipisie in a big way, demanding a trial. Moon, wanting to prove Eclipsie's guilt to Star, relents and allows one. Fast forward to the day of the trial, and we get to see the alleged crimes of Eclipisie laid out by the Magical High Commission. First and foremost, they demand to know if she wrote the evil chapter of the Butterfly Spellbook, to which she responds,
"Yes, I did. But for the record, I never called it the evil chapter. That was your people's name for it."
Now this is a really interesting statement, especially in how it directly confronts the very potent visual coding for this style of magic. We are shown that using this magic seems to have a physical cost, and that it even seems to enthrall some of those who are exposed to it. But does that make it evil in some kind of physical sense? If we're judging the magic based on how it's used, it's just another form of institutional magic, if a more concentrated and costly version. While the vibes of this magic are still questionable, to put it mildly, does developing and recording this magic rise to the level of a crime worthy of death or permanent imprisonment? I certainly wouldn't think so. Next, we get to the heart of the matter. What the Magical High Commission is really riled about.
Did you abandon your husband, King Shastakam, and your kingdom to elope with a monster?
First, let's point out the obvious emphasis on the monster part of this accusation. If Eclipisie merely bailed on being a queen, this would not be a conversation. The real crime she's being accused of here isn't dereliction of duty, it's miscegenation, which, if you're fortunate enough to have never heard that term before, is the word ethno-nationalist types use to describe the crime of being in a mixed-race relationship. I put it to you, this is what the Commission really cares about. Everything else is window dressing. Romulus straight up wants to execute her for this.
Death! Death!
Insidiously, the other elements of the Magical High Commission aren't far off from this perspective either, though they are much more quiet about it. After Romulus's unhinged question about if Eclipisie eats babies or not, Star notes that Hecapoo still marks her down in the evil category for her answer. The trial is a formality to the Commission. Their decision was already made before any arguments were presented. One can't help but be reminded of the real-life historical equivalents of this kind of show trial. Finally, before the Commission pronounces their sentence, Eclipisie asks them what they did to her daughter, Meteora. They lie and claim not to know, but are forced by the Box of Truth to reveal that they hid her lineage and gave her away. It then comes out that this trial was used by Star and Moon to reveal this truth. Moon, notably, is more mad at the Commission for concealing her family's history than anything they were going to do to Eclipisie, but still. Star rebukes them strongly.
You lied to our family for generations.
Omnitraxis defends their choice with a very revealing line.
Can you imagine if the power of magic fell into the hands of a monster?
If you're looking for a smoking gun that Mewni is an ethnostate, there you have it. Even a mixed-race Mewman raised within the privileged halls of the monarchy was too much for them. The fear in that line also speaks of guilt, knowing that they have been oppressing the monsters for centuries. Ethno-nationalists often quibble about what would happen if the shoe were on the other foot, but it's not a fear in any kind of reality, more an after-the-fact justification. Here, though, in more literal terms, it's foreshadowing the conflict with Meteora at the end of the season. Meteora, having discovered her birthright, is furious at what was stolen from her and proceeds to go on a rampage. While her anger is exceptionally justified, her path of complete destruction less so. She is ultimately brought down by Eclipisie herself, an exceptionally brutal act. However, Meteora is not destroyed, merely reverted to a baby form. Star, quite taken by this act of sacrifice, relinquishes the royal wand and the kingdom itself to Eclipisie.
Things haven't been right since my family took the kingdom. The best thing I can do as queen is return what my family stole from you.
This is an exceptionally radical act by Star, with deep-reaching consequences for Mewni, and it won't be the last act of its kind either. Here we begin to see Star the Revolutionary. Those in her royal position aren't generally known for giving up their personal power in the interests of systemic change, and while the most radical act would perhaps have been the abolishment of the monarchy itself, this is still a powerful step forcing the politics of Mewni into the direction that she firmly believes in. And so we arrive at Season 4. Without question the most controversial season of the run, but also the most fruitful in terms of this analysis. If you're familiar with the show, you probably won't be surprised that I'm going to split the final 6 episodes into their own section to discuss later on, as I don't want to overshadow the rest of Season 4, and believe me, there's a lot to talk about. I'd like to start with something that I think is fairly understated in the show. Star's reasoning for sticking with Eclipisie rather than moving on with her parents. Star does give an explicit reason for this.
I feel like I gotta stay here and help Eclipisie figure this out.
But I think we can infer a little more here. It's likely she makes this choice because she still firmly believes in her political project of reconciling monsters and Mewmans. Star sees working with Eclipisie as a tremendous opportunity to advance this project, which, again, is quite refreshing for a main character in a show like this to be ideologically motivated, especially to this extent. The easy thing would have been to pack it up and leave with Moon. Perhaps Star sees in Eclipisie the opportunity for a path not taken, a path firmly outside of the political mainstream, a path that could only be offered by an elder statesperson completely despised by all of the political establishment, a path offered by somebody really old. Joking aside, it's not a mystery why Star put her faith in Eclipisie. Despite Eclipisie's foibles, she represents the direction things by all rights could have gone had the political mainstream not rejected her so fiercely. Man oh man though, does Eclipisie have foibles. To put it bluntly, she's written as a screw-up for most of the season, with Star none too subtly acting as a regent for her. Eclipisie almost misses her meeting with the Spider-Bite Kingdom, doesn't play a meaningful role in the Unity cornball game, even plays VR games, not telling anyone where she went, and can just be kind of out of touch in general.
Are you seriously worried about what I think? Eclipisie, why don't you ever worry about what poor people think?
My people? They haven't even given me a proper coronation.
Most alarmingly, she seems to have no concept of what she means in the overall context of Mewni's history, or even a concept of what she means to Star. Though, to be fair, her attention is understandably distracted by her family issues. Still, despite this, we do see the concrete impact she has on the monster residents of Mewni. We meet a jailer who is annoyed to no longer be able to arbitrarily imprison monsters. Monsters are now allowed at the Queen's table during dinner. And most interestingly, giving houses stolen from monsters in generations past back to the descendants of those monsters. This is perhaps the most spicy of the show's critiques, because to my eye at least, it rebukes the modern practices of home theft going on in certain parts of our world. The size of this house is a clear symbolic indicator that the Mewman settlers, in no uncertain terms, do not belong there. So returning it makes sense for a lot of reasons. Although, in true Eclipisie fashion, she seems to have forgotten to provide any assistance or guidance to the displaced Mewmans, that we see anyway. These Mewmans find their way to Moon and River's retreat, much to Moon's intense frustration, though Moon eventually relents and lets them stay. Over the course of the season, more and more Mewmans join this community. If you're a student of history, you may have already clocked what this is, but let me say it directly. This is a suburb. A suburb not so subtly generated by the Mewman equivalent of white flight, as Mewmans reject having to live in an integrated society with monsters. The suburb even completes its evolution to a full-on gated community near the end of the season. And if there's any question as to the true nature of this community, the residents make it very clear why they are there.
All those who oppose Eclipisie say aye.
Aye!
Residents like this Gary from Disco Elysium-esque guy, Manfred. Explicitly bigoted against monsters, snobby as all get out, and most plot interestingly, may have been in on the first attempt to eliminate Eclipisie. Great work on that, guy. Throughout the season, we get some important characterization of Moon. While it's not exactly new information that Moon has a serious problem with monsters, here we begin to see a lot more of it.
Monsters living among humans. I never thought I'd see the day.
It's subtle, but you can hear the disappointment in her voice, and see it in her expression. You can tell she's holding back her full views so as not to upset Star. Again, a dynamic I'm sure more than a few have experienced in recent years. In the episode where Moon retrieves her planner, she's particularly saddened by the state of the kingdom, and it's not hard to imagine her blaming Eclipisie for this. Even as one could argue the original fault lies with the Magical High Commission, or even Meteora more directly. This is also the episode where she encounters Mina. Mina, dressed up in a white sheet of some sort to scare people away.
Suspicious.
Mina reveals her desire to restart the Solarian Warrior program, a program of infusing Mewmans with magical strength with the aim of eliminating monsters entirely. While Moon rejects Mina here, we are shown the depths of her distaste for Eclipisie. Moon is perfectly fine with Mina's plan. So much so that she doesn't even send a warning to Eclipisie, or even Star, her own daughter. I don't think it should be overlooked that that was an option. This makes what Moon ultimately ends up doing somewhat more believable to me. She's okay with the plan, could even be considering helping with it at this point, especially taken with all of her long-standing antipathy towards monsters that we've seen throughout the series, the rise of Eclipisie being the final straw. But more on all that later on, of course. We're also shown some interesting tidbits of Mewni's history through Glossoric's time travel shenanigans. Specifically, we see the point where humans from Earth first cross over to Mewni. Glossoric grants them the wand, and with it, institutional magic. Interesting callback to Mewnipendence Day when he uses the book to brief them on what to expect. Though, to his credit, he glosses Eric over the monster-hating parts of the book. We're also explicitly told that he created the Magical High Commission. It's also worth pointing out he's training Meteora, a literal baby, in magic here, basically handing her a loaded gun, though admittedly we never see her using magic badly. Maybe he's just doing it to have everything in place for what he seems to know is coming in the ending sequence. Perhaps Glossoric's whole deal could be a commentary on the seeming carelessness or even callousness by which deeply oppressive institutions are formed and maintained. Or maybe he's just the Squad-a-Law guy's half-brother. Who knows? The show certainly has enough going on thematically already, so I don't want to speculate too much on him. Now I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Eclipisie's coronation. Excuse me, Corn-o-nation. The literal crowning moment of Star's attempt to bolster Eclipisie's credibility and mend Mewni. It does not go well. Globgor, Eclipisie's monster husband, is released from his crystal prison. The Magical High Commission immediately blames Eclipisie for this.
She doesn't care about Mewni. All she cares about is her freak monster family.
Star immediately sets off to stop Globgor's presumed rampage. However, she quickly finds out that he's just trying to get as far away as possible to not make trouble for Eclipisie. She returns with him to the ceremony's stage. Needless to say, people flip out, especially the Magical High Commission.
We will never be safe if Eclipisie is allowed to be queen.
Now, it's subtle, but you can see Moon here trying to keep Star from getting involved in what comes next. Pretty good odds she did this less out of a concern for Star's safety and more to prevent her from discovering the truth and ruining the plots. The Magical High Commission continues to flip out.
Just give yourself up, Globgor! You and Eclipisie have struck terror into the hearts of humans for too long!
Finally, Globgor offers to make the ultimate sacrifice to protect his family.
Put me back in the crystal, and let my family go.
Of course, this still isn't enough to placate the Magical High Commission.
He's a king of monsters, and Eclipisie set him free!
Note that Romulus's issue with Globgor isn't even anything he's done. It's what he is. A monster king. Letting him out would none too subtly be against the existing political order. Any actual people he's eaten are besides the point. Eventually, Star critically succeeds on a logic check.
It was you!
Turns out, this entire situation was a false flag operation by Romulus. And Moon, but we don't find out that part until much later. Romulus is arrested by Hecapoo, though we are later shown that there is no meaningful accountability for him, and he laughs it off as a joke.
A mess? Oh no! Please don't arrest me! No, not the dungeon again!
A rather depressing but very honest portrayal of a lack of meaningful oversight of policing. Anyway, after Romulus is momentarily dealt with, Eclipisie puts the fate of Globgor to a vote.
Will you accept my husband as well?
Wait, you want us to choose?
This is a monarchy, not a democracy.
It succeeds, which does hint at the future potential for Mewni democracy. Taken together with the fragile but holding new peace between monsters and humans, this seems like a pretty big W all around for the state of Mewni's politics. Unfortunately, well, if you're familiar with the show, you know exactly where this is headed. But before we get into all of that, we need to solve a mystery. A mystery I'm calling Star Butterfly and the Missing Seasons Worth of Plot Development. I don't fault the showrunners, nor the writers, nor anybody involved in the actual creation of the show for this, but I think it's pretty clear they were aiming for 5 seasons, and only received 4. Why do I think this? Well, there are a lot of plot beats that felt rushed in Season 4, and there's a sizable number of setups for plot lines that would never be resolved as well. For example, everything going on with Ludo. In some episodes, we see him in a terrible headspace, still obsessed with Star, the wand, and whatnot. But when we see him in the finale, we see a largely happy, presumably rehabilitated off-screen Ludo. Now that's what I call Ludo narrative dissonance. Okay, I'm sorry. Another example, and I really hate to bring this up because I kind of wanted to keep everything to do with romantic relationships out of this, but the off-screen dumping of Kelly was a pretty big surprise. To her, too.
Actually, Kelly and I decided to stop doing the breakup buddies thing. But it's cool. Things were super amicable.
Cool.
How sad is that? My breakup buddy broke up with me.
Damn, that's cold, Marco. This, of course, being in service of getting Marco and Star together for the finale. There's also the question of why the magic realm is being corrupted again, especially in such an intense way. This appears to be much the same kind of corruption that Toffee caused. Perhaps one could read into it some kind of inherent corruption of power, but that doesn't quite scan either. Most likely they just didn't have the time to get whatever it was on screen before the end of the show. One of the clearest cases of compression is Moon's fairly radical turn from initially rejecting Mina to what she ends up doing in the finale. I can't help but wonder if there wasn't supposed to be some kind of incident that really pushes her over the edge. In the finale, she cites being separated from her daughter by Eclipisie when they fought Meteora, but that really feels like a band-aid justification. I guarantee you there was supposed to be something else here. As it stands, the timeline is too compressed. There's also River, whose growing feeling of alienation from Star really felt like it was leading to something.
You have a sneaking suspicion that no one takes you seriously, including your own wife. And then there's the case of your daughter.
I get that the family dynamics have mainly been about Star and Moon, but I do think there was something there that was going to be explored. Finally, had the show gone on a season longer, I think we would have likely gotten the answers to a lot of things about Globgor and Eclipse's pasts. Especially the truth about Globgor eating the dude. That definitely reads as something we, the audience, were meant to speculate about and then receive a concrete answer for down the line. Also pretty good odds we'd have seen how Eclipse and Globgor first met. That's way too juicy a story hook to ignore. But anyway, all that aside, while this forced compression doesn't excuse all of the ending sequence's issues, I do think it's worth giving them a little bit of leeway that they did what they could to give the show an actual concrete ending, rather than having it languish unfinished. It reminds me quite a bit of the ending to Stargate Atlantis. Hoo boy, did they compress a lot into that last episode, even bringing Atlantis back to Earth. And here we are, sitting atop the lift hill before the final drop. If you've skipped to this point in the video, I've got what you're hungry for, but would still strongly recommend going back and watching the earlier parts of this analysis for the full context. Anyhow, the controversy around the ending is not unwarranted. I've already touched on how there are a ton of missing pieces and weak connective tissue in the lead up to the finale, but I genuinely do believe, in the context of the show's themes that I've discussed, it's a more thematically appropriate ending than people give it credit for. If you yourself take a hardline stance against the ending, as many do, I ask your patience here. I'm not saying I'm gonna change your mind, but there may be aspects to appreciate that you haven't considered. I believe the ending of the series is thematically misunderstood in the same way as Snowpiercer's ending, which I do have a video on that if you're interested, filtered to hell as it is. Anyway, without further shenanigans or plugs, let's discuss the ending arc. After traveling to Mewni through the dangerous magical dimension, our heroes are split up. Marco makes a very important discovery, that the Magic High Commission is working with Mina.
She's our best option. Some risks are worth taking.
But she's completely crazy!
While this is surprising in the moment, this kind of collaboration is not without matching historical precedent in real life. Centrist to conservative institutions like the Magical High Commission have often gladly gone along with the more radical right if it means crushing any hint of leftward movement that threatens the political or economic status quo. And while we never see the Magical High Commission on the front lines of the conflict, they still have a role in Mina's insurrection. Specifically, it's worth pointing out the Magical High Commission shut down the portals allowing people to travel between dimensions. I think a real solid argument could be made given the timing of this that this was done to keep Star herself away from Mewni, knowing that she would fight against their plan, especially with the previous plot having failed so completely at Star's hands. The show never says this outright, but I don't think it's a stretch of the imagination. Meanwhile, Star rushes to the monster village and encounters a magical, emphasis on the word magical here, suit of Solarian armor running amok. Everyone believes that it's surely Mina piloting it. Many of Star's friends are wounded in this battle.
Our long national nightmare is over.
They spend every chambered round they have in this fight, with the only thing that actually stops it being Eclipse's magic of mass destruction, the spell with no name. Yet in a very that's not the worm, it's his tongue moment, we come to find out that it was not in fact Mina in there, but some mook. Cut to what some characters describe as more than 100 Solarian warriors, just like the one they defeated, with Mina herself taking point. I've seen some people argue that this force still could have been defeated by Eclipse, but even setting aside how much of a stretch this seems mechanically, the entire point of this episode is establishing the threat of just one Solarian warrior on their own, and that threat was clearly thematically communicated. Most significantly, in the context of this analysis, Star encounters the penultimate boss of her ideological journey, her own mother, Moon. The penny drops, and Star comes face to face with the full reality of her mother's views. Moon created the Solarian warriors, and is working with Mina. To say Star is devastated would be putting it mildly.
You traitor!
Far from being invested in Star's new egalitarian world, Moon sided with the biggest anti-monster ethno-nationalist on Mewni. Despite all of Star's attempts to get Moon on board throughout the series, it would appear, at best, Moon was just playing along, and never meaningfully indulging her. Moon never gave an inch. After all, her attending of Eclipse's coronation was not an actual favor to Star, but likely to witness her plan to depose Eclipse. I'm confident this feeling of disappointment with a relative's political beliefs resonated with a lot of viewers. When one begins to develop their values and ideological beliefs, it is inevitable for those beliefs to be tested by interactions with one's relatives, particularly one's parents. For some, this is a relatively light proposition. For others, this can be deeply fraught, filled with hostility, and potentially even leading to a permanent severance of relationships. What we are seeing here is on the scale of the latter. And unfortunately for Star, Moon does not care in the least about what Eclipse means to Star's project of Mewman and Monsters solidarity. Again, it's worth quickly pointing out that this turn, though not a 100% fit, is not coming from nowhere. Moon really hates Eclipse, and is not the biggest fan of monsters either, to boot. Particularly in the context of Eclipse stopping Moon from dealing with Meteora. It also likely didn't help that Moon was pressed into being the leadership of her Mewman's only suburb, filled to the brim with those against Monsters and Eclipse both. That said, it's still hard not to be disappointed on Star's behalf, but I maintain that this is not out of character. The specific deal Moon offers Eclipse is for Eclipse to give up the crown to her, and for Eclipse and her family to leave Mewni permanently. Eclipse accepts the deal. Mina, however, does not.
You know, just scooch a little so I don't accidentally get you when I run her through with my sword and all.
I used to look up to this person.
Moon attempts to regain control of the situation by dispelling the magic imbued in the Solarian warriors. This does not work, presumably because the Solarians secretly swore their oath to Solaria, not Moon. This does raise a lot of questions as to how these one-sided oaths work, and it does feel a little messy as a plot point, but it does fit the situation thematically. Moon has lost control of the reactionary forces she propped up. Again, many such cases of this throughout history. You'll note the dismissive hand gesture Moon uses when she attempts to call off Mina. In her arrogance, she genuinely believed that she had the situation under control until that final moment. Anyway, after Moon rolls a critical failure on her Dispel Magic spell, Mina sets to work on what she always intended.
Arrest every monster and monster smoocher you can find!
Now I want to drill down real quick on the word choice here. Monster smoocher. This is a term that Romulus used as well earlier, because of course he did.
Look, I just want that monster smoocher out of Mewni!
If you're from a part of the world, or even a part of the US, where you're not able to immediately clock the two-word phrase that this is allegorical for, I'm not gonna rob you of that. But if you do know the vile phrase in question, well, I think you'll agree it was a pretty bold choice to even get this close to it. Mina charges, now ready to eliminate Moon, Star, Eclipse, and everybody else in her way, but Hekapoo saves them. I would argue this turn from Hekapoo is actually out of left field. She went all the way along with the plan until this point, and the most critique she's shown her institution is her distaste with Romulus's methods. Perhaps this is another thing that would have been better fleshed out had there been 5 seasons. She takes them to the tavern at the end of the multiverse. Clearly a reference to Douglas Adams' Hitchhiker's Guide series book, The Restaurant at the End of the Universe. Would definitely recommend that book series. Wonder if anyone's spending a year dead for tax purposes in this one. The tavern is something of a refuge for people who are trying to get away from
magical issues or power-hungry rulers.
This is said in kind of a throwaway manner, but it does indicate the writers are scrambling to build up the case for what they're about to do with what little time remains from as many angles as they can reach. Once inside, Star and Moon really have it out.
Star, let's just take a seat and talk about this.
What is there to talk about exactly? We can't go back to Mewni because we'll die from a situation that you caused.
Eventually, Star storms off and says the line I think lost a lot of people immediately.
I hate magic.
What?
There are a plethora of reasons for us, the viewer, to have come to grips with how magic has historically been deployed against monsters, that it could be seen as something between a tool of colonization and militarized policing. But for all of Star's progress in her ideological journey, this still feels abrupt, early. Make no mistake though, given everything we see in the show, this is absolutely the correct conclusion to reach about magic, thematically and mechanically. Had this been established with maybe 1 or 2 discussions in earlier episodes, this might not have been so jarring. But again, likely a casualty of the rushed ending. Beyond beginning to understand and hate magic itself, she further comes to an even greater conclusion while talking to Glossaric in his pocket dimension.
I'm gonna destroy it.
Absurdly fast though it is, this marks a victory over the final boss of her ideological journey, herself and her position in the world, demonstrating that she is willing to sacrifice her own personal power and prestige to change the world. This is, incidentally, the final boss of many privileged people's ideological journeys, and one not easily overcome. Of course, I think the writers knew this, so they bolstered the point by bringing her to see the tapestry of her fate. Seeing herself destroying the magic in her tapestry further pushes her to action, which, I'm not the biggest fan of this kind of prophecy or predestination stuff, but I can see why they did it in the absence of more time for a cleaner justification. They also back-justified her original outburst specifically as a temper tantrum.
I actually destroyed the magic, so my temper tantrum was right all along!
Which, okay, fair, but I still don't think anybody would be out of line feeling this is a little flimsy. I do enjoy that they called back to Toffee here, though.
I guess this means Toffee was right.
Surprise!
While some may say the later seasons don't fit with the first at all, I would argue that Toffee's whole deal indicates that they had a lot more of this planned than people give them credit for. Destroying magic was likely always going to be the ending. This kind of thing is not without precedent in the magical girl genre, of which Star vs. the Force of Evil is definitely a part of. Madoka Magica, for example, also has a protagonist fight against a magical system of oppression, and thoroughly upends it. Though in a vastly different way, of course. Anyhow, Star returns from Glossaric's dimension and announces her intentions to everyone else.
I'm gonna destroy the magic.
This sets the stage for the final episode of the series, Cleaved. Cleaved is busy, even in comparison to the highly compressed episodes that preceded it. You'll note they even cut the intro short to squeeze as much from the remaining runtime as possible. To begin, it's definitely worth drilling down on everyone's initial reactions to Star's plan here. Marco, ever the practical one, questions how this would even work.
You're gonna destroy the magic? Is that even possible?
Hekapoo is not only okay with it, she seems to actively encourage it, and unlocks the portals to make it happen.
I'm destroying the magic.
Yeah, sure. Blow it up.
This is despite the fact that she is herself of the magic, and destroying magic would surely destroy her too. This stance, as difficult as it is to swallow, was realistically the only one possible for her in order to not darken the tone of the ending considerably. That said, it is perhaps more out of nowhere than any other character's actions in the finale. We are never shown a single frame of Hekapoo expressing sympathy for monsters, and yet now she is prepared to lay down her life for their liberation. This is one of my biggest issues with the ending, though again I'll chalk it up to the series ending compression. I have no doubt we would have seen characterization in that direction had there been time for it, in an additional season, and perhaps we do see the first cracks of it in her dust-ups with Romulus at least. Even still, this is a very tough pill to swallow, and I'm not gonna pretend it isn't. But I don't believe it fundamentally ruins the ending by any means. Even Glossaric seems pretty chill with the demise of capital M magic, despite him being the founder of it.
I can't believe you actually did it!
But again, it's hard to say with him. Maybe he'd rather disappear than have to deal with his son anymore. Now, Eclipisie and Moon's reactions to the idea of destroying magic are perhaps the most interesting ones.
Wait, Star, what if we all go and fight Mewni together? I mean, we've never done that before. Right, Moon?
Yes. 3 queens fighting for the good of Mewni.
Even after everything that has happened, including the potential death of her monster husband, Eclipisie is initially not prepared to consider destroying magic, to the extent of preferring to go down fighting conventionally rather than lose that aspect of herself. This demonstrates the limits of Eclipisie's ideological beliefs. Unlike Star, she was not able to get past herself to see the bigger picture, at least in this moment. In the larger sense, one could see this as highlighting the importance of not limiting your ideological beliefs to those espoused by your favored political figures. Moon, despite likely still hating Eclipisie's guts at this point, agrees with her assessment. Star is having none of this though, and portals to the realm of magic. She attempts to destroy the magic by using the Whispering spell on her own, but she is not successful. This could be seen as highlighting the need for collective action over individual action, even if you come from a place of power like Star does. Fortunately for Star, Eclipisie and Moon join her. I kind of wish they had shown a little less unicorn fighting and a little more explanation of this fairly abrupt turn, given their responses not even 5 minutes ago, but oh well. Moon apologizes to Star, perhaps finally seeing her perspective clearly.
I know, you're right. The age of queens and magic needs to end.
Star, Moon, Eclipisie, and even Meteora then set to work dispelling the magic. The magical force ghosts of all the previous queens show up to witness this, Solaria included. Eclipisie can't meet her gaze at first, but she eventually shows off Meteora to her. It's surprising that Solaria doesn't recoil from this, given her reputation, but perhaps passing away gave her new clarity. Still feels like something of a stretch to have all the former queens supporting this action, but it does add a feeling of history to the moment. Anyhow, the royals complete their incantation, and the realm of magic begins to rapidly deteriorate. It's worth pointing out here that Star believes the destruction of institutional magic comes at an even higher personal cost to her, that it would remove her ability to go to Earth to be with Marco. She really put it all on the line for her beliefs. I will say it's worth asking how long it would have taken Star to destroy the magic were it not for Mina's insurrection. But given her ideological growth and conviction, it does read as she would have gotten there eventually. But one does wonder what that version of the ending might have looked like without the specter of Mina to motivate reform. Regardless, Marco is sent back to Earth, and Star finds herself back on Mewni. We immediately see the Solarian warriors crumble, and the monsters let out a cheer of recognition. After some tearful reunions, we also see the re-emergence of Mina on a very dead unicorn, looking for all the world like one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The image is quite striking, perhaps further highlighting the fatal nature of ethno-nationalism without having to show more casualties on screen. Moon makes an appeal to Mina.
Mina, just stop. This is my fault. Let me help you. You're not well.
Which, to me at least, speaks to the centrist urge to try to sympathize with those of even the most poisonous ideologies. Although I grant they do have something of a history that might lend Mina Moon sympathy. A monster woman successfully gets a shot off on Mina, striking her on the skull she's wearing. Can't help but wonder if this hints the writers had a version of this scene in mind where the arrow ends her, as it would have been a very thematically appropriate ending for her to be felled by an unnamed average monster, one of the people she dedicated her life to vilifying and oppressing. But I'm sure the powers that be never would have allowed that ending. Then Mina gets all, you can't fight ideas with bullets, but from the other direction.
You can get rid of me. It's so easy. But the sweet thing is, I'll never really be gone, 'cause I've got good ideas. And the thing about good ideas is they tend to kind of hang around like a bad fart.
Which, okay, sure, I suppose that's one way to try to reach those in the back who might not have caught on to the depressingly persistent nature of the real-life ethno-nationalist movement she represents. But it is a little on the clunky side. Which clunky, weird dialogue is one of Mina's whole things, of course, but it may have been best to keep it focused here. Either way, Mina exits, and Manfred exits with her. Ever the worst. One could make the argument that the heroes should have detained her, but from a thematic perspective, I imagine they were trying to say that the threat of what she represents will always be out there for us. One thing we can conclusively say isn't out there anymore is the Magical High Commission. Another excellently bold choice to actually show their remains. No revolution of this kind could be without friction or casualty. While they were people, they made up a nakedly illegitimate institution whose primary purpose was demonstrably to oppress monsters. Sometimes institutions are beyond salvaging and have to be abolished for progress to be made. Oh hey, how'd that picture get in there? My bad. Anyway, make no mistake, Star extinguished some existences today. Potentially even the magical spells that we meet in a few episodes. Though their fate is never spelled out directly. One could hope their dimension was simply partitioned off, but yeah, there's admittedly no in-show basis for that either. Eventually, Marco and Star both catch sight of portals in their respective worlds, and desperately run towards them. Through the power of their love, they merge Earth and Mewni together. I'm somewhat reminded of the conjunction of the spheres from The Witcher, though hopefully Mewni's monsters will fare better than the ones in that series. This is, of course, quite confusing and disorienting for everybody involved. But one could imagine things stabilizing after a time, and even benefiting the residents of both formerly separate worlds in the long term. Thematically, the story has in large part been about messy integrations with promise for the future. Star coming to Earth, monsters and humans, Eclipse's disorderly reign, and now this massive uniting of worlds themselves. This moment is especially appropriate coming from one as delightfully chaotic as Star, this being the apotheosis of her ideology of radical unity. It also isn't the worst setup for any further stories in the setting, were we fortunate enough to ever get any. So what does all of this add up to? Well, to me, Star's ideological journey, from where she starts all the way back in Season 1, to where she winds up in the end, is one of the most interesting coming-of-age story arcs I've seen in a show, animated or otherwise. Even coming from a position of extreme privilege, and going against the wishes of her own family, she is able to correctly ascertain a deeply unjust aspect of her world. Despite being attacked by monsters throughout much of the series, she still chooses the path of empathy and understanding, and most impressively, sacrifices her own power and prestige to change the world. Star is, if you'll forgive my use of the term, the most based Disney princess by a wide margin. If you've watched this whole video and haven't actually seen the series end to end, again, not judging, I would still strongly recommend it. What I've talked about in this video is only a part of the overall tapestry of the show. The show is first and foremost a comedy, and it hits hard.
I know how to drop my pulse to 0, but only for 60 seconds. Run!
Whoa! What is going on? What happened? What are her vitals? Is she breathing?
But you gotta come with me.
Which hand do I take?
It's legitimately great. Definitely one of the best animated shows in recent decades. With all that said, I want to genuinely thank you for watching. This took a lot longer than I bargained for to put it together, and it heartens me to have you watch it all the way through. If you really liked it, please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos like this. Thanks again.